welcome to REHAU Academy on Air. This podcast is a way for us to present non-technical information related to REHAU in a Q&A format with industry experts. I'm Max Rohr, the REHAU Academy Manager for North America.
My guest today is John Barba. John started in the plumbing and heating business at the age of 6 and has been an industry trainer for over 20 years. John is currently the Director of Training at TACO. He is also a past recipient of the Carlson Houlihan Award from 2012 to 2014. Welcome, John.
Greetings, Max. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to ask you a few questions about the industry. What are a couple common mistakes people make when sizing pumps for radiant systems? I know that you have a lot of experience in both pumps and radiant, so I figured you'd be a good person to ask.
Well, thanks, Max. Thanks for that, Max. Common mistakes that I see out there is, well, the first, and this is across the board in hydronics, not just radiant, is really not quite getting the whole relationship between flow and head. We do tend to have a one-size-fits-all mentality. We have, there's a very common perception, and I'm sure you've seen it too out there, that, hey, I got a 3-speed pump, that's all I ever need. Right? It'll do everything because it doesn't have 1 speed, it doesn't have 2 speeds, it's got 3 speeds, right? It's got low, it's got medium, and it has contractor no callback mode. and when you go out there, where do you see, you've been on enough jobs, where do you usually see them set?
3, just don't call back mode.
You're always going to set them at speed 3, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. And it was a beautiful marketing scheme, for 3-speed pumps. It's patently false, but it's a beautiful way to sell them, that this is the only pump you'll ever need. So the mistake number one I see out there is just, guys won't do their calculations to figure out flow, to figure out the head loss through the PEX tubing portion of the radiant system at the bare minimum, or in any kind of a system really, and just say, well, this pump is the only pump I'll ever need. I'll stick this thing in, put it on speed 3, and get the hell out of here. And it will quote unquote work, meaning nobody freezes to death. It brings with it a lot of potential downfalls, and you pay for that big time in terms of maybe electrical consumption, but that's piddly. More in terms of creating a scenario or a situation where the boiler's going to short cycle and you're never going to have a system as efficient as it could possibly be. But it works. Nobody freezes to death. So mistake number one is just not really paying attention to the flow and head requirements of this specific system, and then matching a circulator to meet those performance criteria. 3-speed pump, put it on high speed and get the hell out of there is a very common strategy. For guys that actually go the extra step and who will do the math to a degree, they'll figure the flow needed for a radiant manifold, let's say, and they'll figure out the head loss through the longest or worst case head loss loop on that radiant manifold, but that's where it ends. All right, we don't take into account the head loss through the supply and return piping to that manifold, nor do we take into account the head loss through any sort of a mixing device, which can be considerable, as you know. Like if it's a 3-way tempering valve, thermostatic non-electric tempering valve, the head loss for that can be considerable. And if you wind up with a circulator that's incapable of matching that head loss, you're going to wind up with a system that's not going to perform when it gets real cold out. What you're likely to see is a customer complaining, said, hey, the system works great till it hits about 15 degrees outside. After 15 degrees, it doesn't do bupkis. Something's wrong. And then you gotta put on your Columbo hat and do a little bit of actually it's a Columbo raincoat, isn't it? It's a Sherlock Holmes hat. I get my detectives mixed up sometimes. You gotta start doing some investigation to find out what the problem is. But problem generally is you have a circulator that's undersized for the specific application. That tends to be, from a circulator selection standpoint, those tend to be the two big ones. All right. And then there's a third one that we're seeing more and more of, and it's with variable speed circulators that people think they're freaking magic. You stick it in and it'll figure everything out for you. I don't even have to balance the thing. So you see that happening too, and that goes back to the 3-speed pump too. Is that these things have and this is coming from a company who manufactures and markets and sells variable speed circulators. Is that variable speed circulators are being sold as magic or as some sort of a cure-all for everything, and they're not. They do what they do, and they do it very well, but they're not going to fix everything. So, they're not going to magically know that some loops are long and some loops are short and balance it automatically for you. It's not going to even go anywhere close to that. So those are the three big ones that I see out there in terms of mistakes, common mistakes that are made. And basically, it's just a matter of to solve those mistakes is get your arms around what circulators do, what circulators don't do, and then understanding the dynamics of what you're installing. And that's what you do, obviously, for a living. It's what I do for a living. It keeps us off the streets, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think in general, it's getting easier to figure out some of those things. With our our LoopCAD software, we can figure out the manifold and the supply and return packs, if that's the route that they go, to give people a better idea, so they don't have to do all that math based on what the square footage of that room is. So that's helpful, but yeah, I've definitely seen the other side of that too, where I went to a job site in Colorado when I still worked at Shamrock, and they had a 3/4 inch thermostatic mixing valve for radiant for this entire 10,000 square foot house. And instead of sizing the pipe right, they just had a 007 pulling through it, and then that hadn't worked, so then they just chopped in another 007, so they had the 2 007 pumps in series. And I'm sure that didn't, I think that water is forgiving, so maybe that got to the point that it was okay, I guess. But it just started from that initial, not taking the time to do the math and figure out what pump you would need, and I imagine whatever led to that 007 in series application probably was a few phone calls and an unhappy customer. So it just doesn't seem like it's worth guessing when that's a potential outcome. But that brings me to another question, I guess. As far as just water as a medium, why do you like moving energy around a building with water instead of air?
Well, a couple things. It's quieter. Done right, it's quieter. And I mean, you can get as many BTUs through a 1-inch pipe as you can get through a 12 by 16-inch piece of ductwork. If you're building a house or you're trying to retrofit something, which one's easier, right? Forced air will always have the benefit of being less expensive. Always. I don't see that as changing. And it also gives you the advantage of being able to run cold air through it as well. So it's going to be less expensive and it's going to be more convenient for the guy doing the putting in. And that, to me, that's where the benefits of forced air begin and end. There are a lot of other folks that will say, well, you can put in an air filter, you can clean the air, you can do all this other stuff, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's part of the process. That's kind of stuff you have to do if you're going to be blowing air around. But the benefits for forced air begin and end with cost and convenience for the installer, and that's kind of about it. When you start talking about, anything with hydronics and radiant in particular, now you start to get into comfort. And comfort's hard to quantify if you've never experienced it. Because if you're not freezing to death, and if all you've ever known is forced air, the comfort, quote unquote, comfort that forced air provides, you've never been freezing to death. You never wandering around the house and say, gosh, this is awful. It's just what you consider normal, right? I mean, if you were born wearing yellow sunglasses, how would the world look to you? It
would look very bright. It would look like somebody on a bicycle with the yellow glasses at dusk or something like that, so they could see all the nuances in the pavement. But that's not really the true view of the world, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, but if you were born, came right out of the womb wearing yellow sunglasses, the world would look normal to you, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't know any different. That's what you would consider to be normal. Everything would have you wouldn't know that it looked yellow. It would just look normal. Same thing with forced air heat. If that's all you've ever had, that's how it feels. That's what a heating system feels like. You wouldn't know any different. So it's hard to quantify comfort for someone who's never felt anything different. So one of the mistakes I think that has been made in the marketing of Radiant and the marketing in hydronics altogether is this focus on comfort, 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 without really defining comfort to a customer. How is it supposed to feel? How should they feel? What should they expect? So yes, selling comfort and promoting comfort and marketing comfort is really important for hydronics, but it's so hard to grab. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things that if I'm not freezing to death, I've lived in a house for 35, 40 years. I'm not freezing to death. Nobody's walking around sick and complaining that they feel awful. How much more comfortable could this possibly be? You know, so that's the kind of, I'm not going to say the failure of the hydronic industry, but that's the challenge of the hydronic industry, is to put teeth into that comfort argument. There has to be something tangible there. And on top of that, you have to add so many more different, there's so many other benefits to heating with hydronics that they do need to be enumerated. We tend to talk about comfort and efficiency. Well, when you can't quantify comfort, and when you talk about efficiency, the first thing people ask, well, how much more efficient is it? What's my payback? And boy, my head explodes when people start talking about payback or return on investment. It's a freaking heating system. It's not a slot machine. All right? The only way a boiler is ever going to pay you back is if it gets a part-time job, okay? It's just not going to do that. It's a pig. It eats fuel, it poops heat, and that's that. You know, you make a deal with it. It's an appliance. You make a deal with it. You never ask the stove when the payback is, right? You never ask your microwave when the payback is. But boilers, my God, we start talking about payback because we focus on this vague thing called efficiency. And then it becomes a financial decision and not a lifestyle or features and benefit decision. You know, I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but that's kind of the way it comes out sometimes.
No, and I think that's part of the challenge in our industry is that if we do our jobs really well, it's like your yellow lenses analogy that the homeowner just doesn't even know what discomfort is. They don't know what it is to be uncomfortable. So it's almost like you need to take somebody to a place where you could simulate a really bad heating system, or have them go to a supermarket that's close to where you work and where their house is and say, okay, well, this is a way that we could do it, or go to this place where it's radiantly heated or radiantly cooled or something like that, because comfort is a very hard thing to define. And even the people that study it all the time, like the Center for the Built Environment, they'll tell you what generally makes people uncomfortable, but there is no perfect center for comfort because it's going to be different for every person anyway. So I think that just saying radiant heat is comfortable, like you're getting at, doesn't necessarily ring true to someone who has forced air and is comfortable as far as they know, because they've never experienced something different. So yeah, there's a challenge there, I think, for us to communicate that better.
Yeah, I remember talking to people about radiant comfort, and then somebody said, well, how much is it? And you had to give them an idea, and said, boy, I can buy a lot of slippers for that kind of money, so I don't have to worry about cold feet. No, okay. Clearly that was, the message did not get through, or it did not quite get across. So that's, again, we see that challenge. There's very little to suggest that moving heat and energy with air is superior to doing it with water. There's very little evidence of that. There's a lot more in the other direction. But when we're talking about benefits to the people either building the houses or people who are going to be living in the houses, there has to be more tangible stuff, usable space, freedom of decorating, freedom of how you set up a room, a cleaner, nicer looking, quieter mechanical room, anything we can do to get away from those customizations that we see in mechanical rooms now, and making the setup more standardized and having more of an appliance look is to the industry's benefit. How many times do we walk into a house and see, walk into a mechanical room and see, what to us, to you and I, And to contractors, looks like the Sistine Chapel of artwork, right? We look at this and we go, oh my God, this is like hydronics porn. I love this stuff. You know, this is fantastic. But to the homeowner, it looks like they're living in a nuclear freaking submarine, and it just turns them right off. You know, I was on a job site once where a guy showed me, he was just so proud of his mechanical room, and I went there and I said, oh my God, this is gorgeous. I could never do work like this. This is phenomenal. The homeowner came in and she looked at it, and I swear to God, Max, the first thing she said to the guy was, she turned to him and she goes, I hope the hell you never die. Because if that guy dies, what happens to this system? To her, it looked expensive, it looked complicated, and she'd have to sell off a kidney to pay somebody to figure it out if this guy happened to kick off. You know, so those are the challenges we face as an industry in getting that message across. Everybody knows what a furnace looks like, right? You walk in a mechanic room, okay, that's the heating thingy, all right? It looks like everyone else I've ever seen. Yeah, it makes a little bit of noise, yada, yada, yada. Okay, fine. That it is what it is. I'm not freezing to death. I'm happy, all right? And in the summertime, it keeps me from getting too hot. What's not to love? That's a simple message, man. We as an industry have never been able to put that message, put together a similar message in our favor. We've tried initiatives, you know, for decades, and our market share is where it is. And it's not, you know, I'm not going to say it's not going to change, but it is what it is, and we have to face that as an industry.
Yeah, and I think that it's definitely a fun challenge in that I wholeheartedly think we have the better widget for heating. It's just how do we communicate that to our customers, and then for our customers to communicate it to our homeowners. That's kind of the trick. And I think this was you who invented this trick to explain why water is good for moving energy around, is the match to a water balloon trick. Was that you that started doing that in training?
That was Holland. That was
Holland.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So I did that at a 4-H meeting, a local 4-H meeting that one of the ladies in HR asked me to speak at about a week ago, and I had the match to the balloon filled with air and it pops right away. And then I've got the water balloon, and I ask, well, what do you think is going to happen? And one of the girls sitting right up front says, well, it's not going to break because you wouldn't stand in front of us and make a big mess of our floor. And I said, that's exactly right. So I'm going to do it anyway just to show how it works. But she was a step ahead of me on that one.
Yeah, freaking kid, yeah. That's the kid that also tells the teacher she forgot to assign homework, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some questions that you like to ask the audience when you do your trainings?
Oh, boy. When it comes to Radiant, we have all kinds of fun with that. I like to ask, just to find out where the audience is at, I like to start out with, when you're talking about Radiant, what's the best installation method? And usually, I mean, what would you expect to hear?
Probably in slab, just a basic concrete pour.
Yeah, that's what everybody tells me. Yeah, well, concrete, what? Because it has mass. Well, what does mass do for you? It's more efficient. Maybe yeah, maybe no. It's easier to put in, especially before they pour the slab. You wait till after they pour the slab, it starts to become a little problematic. But I've always been of the opinion that the best installation method for Radiant is the one that makes the most sense for the job we're looking at today. We may love putting tubing in a concrete slab, but if you're doing the second floor in a retrofit, it ain't an option, right? So I try to take a more pragmatic approach with guys to say the best installation method is the one that makes sense for the job you're looking at right now. Tomorrow's decision might be different. Be flexible. The best way, the only way is in concrete. If I can't put it in a 4-inch concrete slab, I want to put it in a 1.5-inch concrete pour. If I can't do that, then Radiant doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of silly. More jobs are done in between the floor joists with or without plates than all others put together, in my opinion. So why not embrace that, and not look down on it. Other questions I like to ask are, is like for surface temperature. Radiant gives off heat based exclusively on its floor surface temperature. So again, I like to ask guys, if I have which room would require a higher surface temperature? Or which would require a higher floor surface temperature to heat the specific room? If the specific room had tile or if the specific room had carpeting? And almost always guys say, well, the carpeted floor is going to need the higher surface temperature. And the answer, it's if it's the same room, the surface temperature I need to heat that room is going to be the same, whether you have a carpeted floor, a tiled floor, a hardwood floor, a bamboo floor, whatever. The surface temperature is going to be the same. What you got to do to get that surface temperature is going to be different based on the level of insulation above the subfloor, right? Which you'd have a higher R value with a carpet pad than you do with tile. So you need a higher water temperature to get there. But the BTU per square foot load is going to be identical whether you have tile, carpet, or hardwood. It doesn't make any difference. So I like to do that just to get guys to start thinking about what they're doing and what the dynamics of how radiant floor heating works, and then take it a step further and say, okay, now you have all of these different rooms, a lot of times with different finished floor materials. How are you going to zone that thing? All right? Can you put a bunch of different rooms with different floor coverings and different loads on one zone? And if you did, what would happen? And then that usually sparks some interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think anytime you can get the contractors actually picturing a job site in their mind, that's helpful for the discussion, instead of just the theoretical, okay, well, the R value is this. If they're thinking about, their neighbor Larry's house that they did and they weren't very comfortable, I feel like you've got a little bit more of an inroad there.
Yeah. So like I said, guys too, if you got two rooms, two rooms side by each, and one room has tile and one room has carpet, and you want to zone them together, where are you going to put the thermostat?
Yeah, those are good questions to ask because there's no right answer there.
Yeah,
direct sunlight somewhere by a window? No, probably not. But
it doesn't matter where you put it. You're wrong, right?
Yeah.
You put it in the carpeted room. The carpeted room will feel fine. The tiled room's going to be too hot. You put it in the tiled room is going to feel fine. The carpeted room's going to be too cold. What do you do? And I said, well, you tweak the flow using those little flow meters. I said, that's good luck with that.
Yeah.
That's a surefire way to mess up the entire system because those aren't fine-tuning instruments, as you well know.
Yeah. And one of the things, too, that we'll hear, we don't, radiant heating is slow. It's slow to respond. Well, it can be if it's buried 6 inches deep in concrete, but that should be one of the tools in your bag. And if a quick response time is something that's important, then go with a panel system or something different. I mean, you can go with a dry system instead of a wet system. Not everything needs to be buried 6 inches deep in concrete. So just the more options you have there, the more likely you are to meet the customer's expectations, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that response time thing, guys say, well, it takes forever to get up the temperature. Well, how far are you turning it off?
Yeah, do that once and then put it in cruise control.
I've lived in houses pretty much my entire life. Okay, I never remember us in January turning the heating system completely off and then turning it on 7 hours later. Yeah, maybe you'd set it back, but I never once remember my father saying, well, we're going to be out of the house for the afternoon. Turn the heating system off.
Yeah, turn it off like a light switch. Yeah.
That just doesn't happen. It's kind of silly to use that as an argument, for anything, whether it's circulate. After people say, well, you got to bring that, when you have to bring that thing up to temperature, you turn the, you have a variable speed pump. What's going to happen? I said, no. What kind you use? I mean, where are you going with this? But how often do you turn a heating system off and let the whole thing go dead cold in the middle of winter? Very, very rarely, if hardly ever. So response time to me is always a matter of, residentially, when you're talking about, setback. What are your thoughts on setback?
For radiant, I think that whole concept is the forced air people have done a better job of marketing setback thermostats, so people get more aggressive than they should with radiant system, so they go to work and set it back 7 degrees, which it may not even drop that far, but then you're going to have to recover that much further if it is, 6 inches of concrete or something like that. So I usually tell people, a couple degrees at night or something like that, but that's part of the reason that they pulled the Energy Star labels off of thermostats years ago, is because doesn't just having a setback thermostat doesn't mean it's more efficient if your setback schedule is not appropriate for the heating source, or is more aggressive or less aggressive than it should be.
Right. I used to think to my Italian grandmother. She was a lovely lady, spoke English as well as you could expect from a woman who grew up in southern Italy. But she used to tell me, she says, Giovanni, it's easier to clean a room than it is to clean a dirty room. And I said, okay, that woman was brilliant, because it's easier to heat a warm room than it is to heat a cold room, right? If you're going to do setback, no more than 3 degrees for no less than 4 to 5 hours is probably going to save, is going to lower your overall consumption of energy. But anything, for a shorter interval or for a deeper setback, unless it's for, a week at a time, all right? If it's on a daily kind of a thing, you're going to expend more energy getting it back up to where you need it to be than if you just left it alone. So I setback, if you're going to be gone on vacation for a week, oh, hell, yeah. Turn it down, give yourself an aggressive setback. But if you're just leaving to go to work for the day, couple 3 degrees should be enough. Anything more than that, you're gonna have issues. I think regardless of the heating system, personally.
One of my former coworkers, Greg Gibbs, he when he would do the training too, would say, okay, this is what I usually tell homeowners when I go in and we're looking at changing out a boiler. I say that we're going to get a new boiler in here, and it's going to be really small, and it's going to look really cool, and then we're going to turn it on, and we're going to leave it on all the time. What do you think about that? And then, the initial reaction from a homeowner is, well, that doesn't sound like a good idea, that we should leave this thing on all the time, that, I don't want to use it when I'm not home or whatever. But it's just a completely different mentality, because we're really, with the modulating boilers, we're just putting this thing in cruise control. So it's, moving the gas pedal up and down, but it's not really advantageous to have it on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off all the time. And I think that cycle efficiency is what people forget. And by setting back the thermostat 7 degrees, that's where you can get into trouble, I think, with that. And you see a boiler that's 2 years old that has, a decade's worth of run cycles already. It's because the temperature's been up and down too many times, I think.
I think, and you add to that, the type of zoning package a radiant system really does need to function properly. It's a pretty aggressive zoning package. You start adding a whole crap ton of zones on a system, and then you have them, and even with a modulating boiler, you're going to encourage that boiler to short cycle more than it wants to already. All right, say you've got your smallest zone is maybe 8,000 BTUs, and your lowest firing rate is on that boiler is 25,000 BTUs. That thing's still going to short cycle even at its lowest turn down ratio. So you've got to, that's when you start thinking about buffer tanks or something else to add some water content and to keep that boiler from short cycling itself into an early grave, and to short cycle itself into relative inefficiency. I'm not going to say it's inefficient, but it's not as efficient as it could or should be.
Yeah, it's not a best case scenario.
No, I mean, and again, when you zone a radiant system aggressively, that's part of the recipe, And I had a discussion with a guy online. Well, let's call it what it was. It was an argument about doing a heat loss for a boiler replacement. Something relatively simple as that. And the guy said, "Hey, I use modulating condensing boilers. I don't need to do a heat loss because, for every job I do, I know this kind of house generally has this kind of heat load. I use 150. I buy a bunch of 150,000 BTU boilers. They'll never be oversized because they'll modulate down on the coldest day of the year, and they'll always be the right size. So why waste my time, And on the face of it, it's a fairly sound argument, but you start to think about it and go, wait a minute. Yeah, on the high side, you're going to be fine. But if the heat load of the house is really, 75,000 BTUs, and you've got a 150,000 BTU boiler in there, with a 5-to-1 turn down ratio, now you don't have a 5-to-1 turn down ratio. You get about a 2-to-1 or 2.5-to-1 turn down ratio. And so it's not as you're not getting the full benefit of that boiler to begin with. And then number two, you're mostly concerned about not so much being oversized on the high end at this point, but you're going to be oversized on the low end. All right, a 5-to-1 turn down ratio at 150,000 BTUs, your lowest load, your lowest output on that boiler is 30,000 BTUs. Your lowest input technically is 30,000 BTUs. The output would be something less. But now you're starting to talk about, okay, as it gets warmer out, the heat load's not 75,000. It's going to be considerably lower. We spend about 50% of the heating season at 1/3 load or less. All right, so that's about 25,000 BTUs for half of the heating season. Now you're talking about a boiler that's going to be oversized a lot of the time, and that's, again, encourages that short cycling that is just so common with those things. And when you short cycle, as you well know, you start wearing stuff out. And when you start wearing stuff out prematurely, rather big ticket service items break well ahead of time, far sooner than you think they should. And now you have to pay big bucks. The homeowner's got to pay big bucks to have something serviced or replaced on that boiler. And whatever they saved in terms of fuel efficiency over the first 3 to 5 years is now shot to hell.
Yeah, and I think it'd be interesting to see a study of, and I don't really know how you would account for all the variables, but to just see two parallel houses with one just kind of rule of thumb, guesswork, sizing for everything, and then the house next door, right-sized everything, pumps, expansion tanks, boilers, zoned well, and see how much of a difference that makes, because I feel like people right next to each other with those two systems might really love and might really not love the hydronics system, depending on how well it was sized. So my last question for you, John, is who is your favorite teacher and why?
Can I throw something up before you say that there?
Sure. Yep.
You hit on something kind of interesting, is that, everyone says, well, hydronics is forgiving. Yes and no. It's first wife level forgiveness, all right? Just to say not a lot, all right? A poorly designed, laid out, zoned hydronic system, as anybody who's ever had to go back and service one that somebody else installed, there's no easy fix, and you also know that it creates a lot of headaches for the homeowner, both in terms of efficiency, in terms of noise, in terms of, this area just never seems to heat, blah, blah, blah. Forced air is forced air is forced air, I mean, it's you can mess up a forced air system, but most people understand that, if you live with a forced air system, every room in the house is not going to be equally comfortable. You again, it's that yellow sunglasses thing that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
So hydronics can be messed up pretty unfortunately for something that is as forgiving as we like to think it is. Problems with hydronics can have more far-reaching consequences for the homeowner than problems with forced air. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And that, again, designing it well prevents even having to worry about the medium to be moving energy around, because there are ways to design forced air systems well too. It's just we're not accounting for the full human comfort picture, which would probably be another few hours of podcast, I guess, to figure out what that actually means. So.
Yeah, I mean, your average forced air system is what it is. Your average your well-designed, well-laid-out forced air system is awesome. It can be a very good system, right? But those are few and far between. Your normal garden variety track house forced air system is what it is, all right? When and in terms of comfort and efficiency, et cetera, in my opinion, that will be better than a badly laid out and badly installed hydronic system. I'm not sure where I'm going with this. It's brilliant in my brain, Max, but now that I kind of articulate it, it's not coming out well. It just, if a person's lived with a marginal, normal garden variety forced air system, then moved into a house with a badly laid out hydronic system,
yeah,
they're going to say, this house is garbage. This is garbage.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was kind of the point.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So who's your favorite teacher?
Who's my favorite teacher? Well, I mean, I've got two. I spent a fascinating year of my life working with Rich Trethewey from This Old House.
Okay.
We had a rep company, and he kind of helped me get my start on this end of the business. I left my family business and went to go work for Richard, and it was just a fascinating year. Working for someone with that kind of experience and that kind of curiosity. One thing about Rich, he's very curious. He's very open to new ideas and different ways of doing things. And it was a very eye-opening experience for me. In that, my worldview was very small when it came to hydronic heating and plumbing until that point. When I went to go work for him, all of a sudden, woof, there is a world out there of really of different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking about things. Everything's not a series loop of fin tube baseboard. There are so many other options out there, and I learned from him that curiosity, always keep an open mind and strive for the right thing. The other, of course, was Dan Hollihan. Dan really set me on a different helped set me on a different career path. When it comes to training, I remember the first time I ever saw him train I was a contractor, and it was at the downtown Worcester, Massachusetts Holiday Inn, where he did a session on hydronics, and I learned from Dan that there was a thing called the point of no pressure change. Why are pumps on the supply? Why are pumps on the return? Learned about what air separators do, what expansion tanks do, different kinds of circulators, and he put it into terms that were very understandable and that were, quite frankly, funny as hell. It was not what I was expecting. And that's an eye opener. You learn, you read Dan's stuff. I mean, you obviously Dan, and you've read his stuff, and every time you talk to him, every time you read something written by him, you learn something. And to me, that's must-see TV, so to speak. You've got to appointment reading whenever Dan, or appointment viewing whenever Dan's appearing somewhere, which he doesn't do anymore, sadly. But whenever Dan writes, you want to read it because you're always going to learn something. And the day you stop learning is the day they close the lid on your box, man. And that's what I learned from Dan. And then the third one's my dad. I mean, my dad was you said I started in the business when I was 6. I was carrying wrenches for the guy. He'd say, go out and get me a wrench, and I go and get him a wrench. He goes, no, not that one, the other one. And then I bring back one. No, not that. Oh hell, I'll get it myself. And that actually happened through high school. I mean, I was just not getting it right. But you worked with your dad too, so you know what it's like, and it's a special thing to be able to do that. And anybody who's worked in a family business, who's worked with their dad, kind of understands what that's all about. There are a lot of guys in our business that can articulate it far better, but that was a very special time in my life to be able to work with my dad, and riding, and being a kid, being a big boy, riding in the truck, when I was like 12, 13, riding the truck. My mom would make lunch, and we'd get in the truck, and I'd feel like a real big guy, and you'll watch and you learn, and those are probably the three main ones for me.
Yeah, I think my first memory of smell of something is plumber's putty, because my dad would bring me to work, and then I would sit, next to his toolbox, and then just use all the tools to just kind of like squish the plumber's putty. So I probably, ruined a bunch of tools by jamming the putty into it, but it was fun at the time, and it kept me busy at work. So yeah, it's kind of funny.
I remember a day when my dad, I was in high school, and my dad was teaching me how to pack a lead joint for a closet flange. So I'm a little older than you, so we were still pouring lead joints back then. And he was showing me how to roll the oakum and stuff and put it in there. And he gave me packing iron. And I said, this packing iron was given to me by my first boss back in the 1930s. And I want you to have it. And I said, wow, cool, Dad, thanks, you know. So he goes downstairs to work on something else, and I'm trying to pack this closet flange in a bathroom remodel that we were doing. And I'm rolling up the oakum, I stick it in, roll it up, stick it in, and I just keep packing it in more and more and more. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, I'm putting a lot of oakum in here. This stuff really compacts. You didn't think it would be that, you could compact it that much, but boy, you keep packing the stuff in. And finally he yells up at me, he said, you done with that yet? And I said, yeah, Dad, I almost got the whole box of oakum in. And he said, what? And he came upstairs and he had that look on his face. I still see this face in my sleep now. Is that look on his face like, I wish he was praying for DNA testing years before it ever happened. He was convinced I was not his kid. There was a mix-up at the hospital or something. Because he had that look on his face. He goes, oh, jeez. Well, you know what I did? Just kept packing it and went all the way through the bottom of the flange into the floor joist. So it's just like we had a box of oakum sitting in the floor joist. So that's when he said, you know, why don't you go get me a wrench in the truck?
Go get the other wrench, yeah. Well, so, I'm sure he would be proud of you. You've helped a lot of people figure out how to navigate hydronics. So
I think I'm not packing lead joints anymore.
That's true, yeah. I guess, and that we don't have lead joints in general. So I wanted to thank you for joining me today. And you can find more from John Barba at taco-hvac.com. And that's where you can find factory trainings and also the online FlowPro University program. So check out taco-hvac.com. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
To find REHAU technical training, go to na.rehau.com/academy and check out REHAU America's YouTube channel. Our Twitter handle is @REHAU, and you can always ask your sales rep for more information about local trainings.